There is something unsettling about the wilderness when night begins its slow crawl over the horizon. The birds vanish into silence. The air thickens with damp earth, and the trees lean together as though sharing secrets they will never allow you to hear. It was in such a place, on a long-forgotten path, that the story of the vanished hiker began. The man had ventured into the woods with nothing but a backpack, a torch, and an eagerness to explore routes less traveled. He was no amateur. Years of hiking had sharpened his instincts, trained his body to push further than most would dare. Yet skill can be a curse in places that demand humility. For it was not on any map that he found the trail. The ground itself gave it away. Bare earth, stamped down by countless feet long ago, yet not by anything living now. The trees bowed over it, their branches clawing across the faint path as though trying to hide it. Moss clung to the stones, and roots coiled like veins across its length. At first glance, it looked abandoned, forgotten, but the deeper he walked, the clearer it became. The trail wanted to be followed. He stopped more than once, tilting his head, ears straining. The forest should have been alive with sound. An owl calling, leaves shivering, the rush of insects. But here silence pressed against him. A silence so thick that he could hear the beat of his own pulse. The further he walked, the deeper the silence grew, until his breathing was the only sound that dared to exist. His torch swept the ground, catching marks in the dirt. They looked like footprints, but something was wrong. Some were too long, others too wide, pressed at odd angles that suggested the weight of whoever left them was not quite human. They did not march forward in a neat line. They staggered, turned, circled as though whoever or whatever walked here could not keep to one path. Still, the hiker pressed on. His journal, found much later by search parties, described the trail with a strange fascination, his words trembling between curiosity and dread. He wrote of a scent in the air, faint, metallic, like rust or blood. He noted how the trees seemed to bend toward him, their bark scarred with symbols carved so long ago the wood had grown around them, sealing secrets into its flesh. He tried to convince himself it was nothing more than an old hunting path, left behind by trappers or wanderers from decades past. But in his heart he knew better. Something about it did not belong, not to the forest he thought he knew. The trail was older than that, older than memory, older than him. The air grew colder the deeper he went. Not the natural cool of a shaded forest, but a biting chill that stung his skin, sliding under his clothes like the grasp of invisible hands. His torch caught strange shapes in the bark, faces or the suggestion of them, warped by age, their eyes hollow knots, their mouths cracked into silent screams. And then, for the first time since stepping onto the path, he hesitated. His journal ends the entry with a single line, scrawled in handwriting more frantic than the rest. "This trail does not want me to leave." He had not yet realized the truth, that the trail was not leading him deeper into the forest. It was leading him out of the world he knew. The trail twisted in ways that made no sense, yet the hiker could not resist following it. Each step pulled him forward as if unseen hands were nudging him along. His torch beam quivered across the ground, catching more of those strange prints. At first, he thought they were human, shapes of heels and toes pressing shallowly into the dirt. But the longer he stared, the less they resembled anything belonging to mankind. Some prints stretched as if the foot that made them had melted before lifting away. Others were split, three-toed, claw-like, gouging deep enough to tear through root and stone. Yet scattered among them were perfectly normal footprints. Bare human feet, small, fragile, impossibly clean, as though they had just been pressed into the soil. He crouched to examine them, his hand trembling as he held the torch closer. The prints led forward, winding into the darkness. But when he turned, they were behind him too. The same small bare feet, pressing into the earth where he had not walked. Something was walking the path with him. His breathing quickened, yet the silence held. No rustle, no snap of branches, no trickle of running water. It was as if the forest had locked itself in place, waiting, watching. He forced himself onward, though the trail seemed to grow narrower, the trees leaning in until their branches tangled overhead, blocking out the sky. The footprints multiplied. They darted in circles, overlapped, scattered in patterns that felt deliberate. He could not help but imagine a crowd moving with him, unseen, surrounding him at every step. His journal recorded his unease. I do not think I am alone. Every time I lift my foot, I expect to hear another fall beside mine. But there is only silence. Always silence. It was then that he noticed the marks on the trees. Not just scars or symbols carved by knives, but handprints, smeared dark against the bark. Some were small, childlike. Others were broad, twisted, as if made by hands not quite human. They climbed high above his head, far higher than anyone could reach without a ladder. The air thickened. His torchlight seemed weaker, the beam swallowed by a mist that had not been there moments before. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the torch. He told himself he was imagining it, that exhaustion was playing tricks, but deep inside he knew what the woods were doing. They were erasing the world behind him. When he looked back, the footprints he thought he had left were gone. The dirt was smooth, untouched, as though no one had walked there in centuries. The trail no longer stretched behind him but closed in, trees knitting themselves into an unbroken wall of bark and shadow. The hiker stumbled forward, panic rising. His breath came in ragged bursts, echoing too loudly in the silence. The prints still marked the earth ahead, urging him deeper, pulling him toward something waiting in the dark. His journal's final words on that page read, "If I turn back, I will not find the world I left. I can only follow." And follow he did, further into a place that no longer belonged to the forest, where the trail itself seemed alive. The footprints no longer led nowhere. They led to him. The forest had grown impossibly dense, the trees stretching higher, their trunks pressed so close together it felt as though he was walking through a prison made of wood. The air clung heavy in his lungs, thick with the stench of damp moss and something else. Something acrid, metallic, almost sweet, like rotting fruit soaked in rust. He lifted his torch, but the beam seemed weaker now, swallowed by the shadows pressing in from every side. The prints had not vanished. They were clearer than ever, fresh as though made moments before. Small bare feet darted across the soil, sometimes ahead, sometimes veering to the sides, sometimes impossibly behind him where no one could have walked. The claw-like tracks still twisted among them, gouging the earth with violent force. Together, they painted a story he could not read but could only feel. It was then, as he stood in the oppressive silence, that the forest breathed. A long, low sigh shuddered through the pines, bending their branches as if they were bowing to some unseen presence. The sound was not the wind. No leaves rustled. No air brushed his face. It came from deep within the woods, a single exhale that seemed to slip into his very bones. And with it came a voice. At first it was faint, like the rustling of paper, a whisper so soft it could have been his imagination. Yet as he stilled his breath, it grew clearer, threading between the trees, curling into his ear. It did not speak words he understood. It spoke syllables stretched too thin, guttural sounds that tugged at the edge of memory but did not belong to any language he knew. Each whisper scraped across his nerves, sharp and deliberate, like fingernails dragged slowly down glass. The hiker froze, gripping the strap of his backpack as though it could anchor him to reality. His torch trembled in his hand, light spilling across the trunks, catching glimpses of shapes. Faces again, hollow, broken faces etched into the bark, their mouths open as though they were the ones whispering. He tried to steady himself, to tell himself it was nothing more than wind funneling strangely through the trees. But then the whisper changed. It shifted, cracked, and for a fleeting moment, he heard something he could not deny. His name, spoken softly, as if the trees themselves knew him. He stumbled back, his boots crunching over the soil, his breath shallow and sharp. He raised the torch wildly, its light sweeping across the shadows, desperate to find the source. Nothing moved, yet the whisper did not stop. It repeated his name again, this time closer, curling against his ear as if lips were pressed right beside his skin. The journal, found later, held one sentence that haunted every reader who came across it. "The pines know me, and they are calling me deeper." The whisper spread then, no longer confined to a single voice. It multiplied, rising into a chorus of hushed tones, dozens of mouths murmuring at once, all weaving around each other, hissing words he could not decipher, but always punctuated by his name. It came from the trees, the soil, the very air. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound pressed through his skull, vibrating his bones, seeping into his mind. The prints on the ground seemed to glow in the weak light, leading him further into the whispering woods, as though the voices were guiding him, urging him not to resist. The hiker forced himself to move, stumbling forward, every step heavier, slower, his will eroding under the weight of that unnatural chorus. The air grew colder still, his breath fogging before him, though no frost touched the earth. His journal words from that night were jagged, hurried, as if written while his hands shook violently. "They want me to follow. They say my name as though they have always known it. If I stop, I think they will come out of the trees, and perhaps they already had." For in the corner of his vision, among the dark pines, he thought he saw movement, shadows shifting, forms bending unnaturally, never clear enough to face, but always there. The whisper rose into one final word, sharp, commanding, undeniable. "Come." And though every fiber of him screamed to turn back, he obeyed. The path wound deeper into the forest, each step dragging him further from the world he once knew. The air thickened with the smell of damp wood and mold, but beneath it lurked something sharper, like the faint tang of smoke long since extinguished. His torch faltered, its beam flickering as though struggling against the weight of the darkness. Still, the footprints led him forward, guiding him through the whispering pines. It was there, after what felt like hours, that the trees opened into a small clearing. At its center sat a campsite, a ring of stones marked where a fire had once burned, their surfaces blackened, though no smoke rose now. A tent stood crookedly to the side, its fabric sagging with rot yet not torn, as if abandoned in haste rather than decay. A folding chair leaned half-collapsed, waiting for a figure that would never return. For a fleeting moment he thought relief might come, that he had found the man he sought or at least a sign of him. But the silence that hung over the clearing told him otherwise. No birds sang, no insects chirped, no wind stirred the grass. It was not the quiet of peace, but of absence. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the brittle leaves. The tent's entrance flapped loosely, as though it had been left open for him. He stooped low, shining his torch inside, and froze. Everything was in order. A sleeping bag lay neatly unrolled, its zip half-drawn, as though waiting for its occupant to return at any moment. A lantern rested beside it, the batteries still full, glowing faintly when he flicked the switch. A small backpack sat at the foot of the bag, unzipped just enough to reveal a folded map, a water bottle, and a half-packed set of clothes. Nothing was scattered, nothing rifled through, nothing in disarray. It was as if whoever had camped there had simply stood up and walked away mid-breath. His journal notes trembled with unease. The tent was not abandoned. It was paused, as though the man stepped out, only to vanish into the trees, leaving time itself behind. He pulled back, his pulse hammering, the beam of his torch quivering against the stones of the dead fire. He thought he saw ashes, yet when he touched them, they were cold, lifeless, as though they had never burned at all. Still, the scent of smoke lingered faintly, drifting through the clearing like a ghost of what once was. The whisper had not ceased. If anything, it grew stronger here. Faint voices circled the clearing, weaving between the tent and the chair, curling around his ankles. He turned, torchlight darting across the tree line, but the shadows pressed too tightly, hiding whatever lurked beyond. Then he noticed the footprints again. They circled the campsite in perfect loops, weaving between the stones, the chair, the tent. Dozens of small bare feet pressed into the dirt, overlapping, crisscrossing. as though a crowd had danced silently around the abandoned camp for nights without end. Interlaced among them, the clawed prints tore deeper into the earth, gouges fresh as if carved moments before his arrival. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair. His breath rasped loud in the silence. He wrote, "It was not left behind. It was taken. The camp is not empty. It is waiting." The air shifted. A chill spread across his neck, crawling like icy fingers brushing his skin. The tense fabric stirred though no breeze passed through. The lantern he had switched on flickered violently, then extinguished. His torch dimmed too, as if something unseen drank the light from its beam. He felt eyes on him, dozens, pressing from every side, fixed, unblinking, patient. And then, from the edge of the clearing, the whisper rose again. Only this time it was not shapeless. It was a word, broken and drawn out, but still recognizable. "Stay!" The tent flapped sharply, snapping as though something inside had shifted. His torch slipped in his grip, the light trembling across the clearing, catching the chair as it slowly folded in on itself, collapsing into the dirt. The hiker staggered back toward the path, but even as he tried to flee, the footprints guided him. They trailed away from the camp, deeper into the trees, as if the forest had always known his next step. And though his instincts screamed to run, the voices made sure he obeyed. The path beyond the campsite felt different, heavier somehow, as though the forest had grown in the moments he lingered. Shadows thickened beneath the pines, weaving around the trail in irregular patterns that twisted perception. His torch trembled in his hand, casting darting beams that barely pierced the oppressive darkness. Then he saw them, eyes glinting between the tree trunks, countless pinpoints of light reflecting torch beams or moonlight. He could not tell which. Some were high, perched like birds on the branches, while others hovered close to the forest floor, moving with impossible silence. They were everywhere, watching, unblinking, patient. His pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed to run, yet his feet remained glued to the soft earth. The footprints he had been following, small bare feet intertwined with clawed marks, continued ahead, leading him deeper, insisting he move forward despite the oppressive presence surrounding him. The whispers rose once more, threading through the air like fingers, curling around his mind. He tried to speak, to shout, but his voice faltered in his throat, swallowed by the forest's cold embrace. The eyes shifted with him, tilting, moving, tracking his every movement. They were intelligent, deliberate, and yet no face could be discerned behind them. Just light, reflecting life that was not meant to belong to this world. Branches cracked somewhere to his right. He froze, torch beams sweeping across the trees. A figure slipped through the shadows, not human, yet shaped vaguely like one. Limbs too long, joints bending wrong, head tilting unnaturally as it watched him. It did not move closer, but it did not retreat either. It simply observed, a predator gauging its prey. He stumbled forward, heart hammering. The whispers coalesced into words, fragmented but understandable. "You followed. You cannot leave. We saw you come. You belong now." The hiker's journal later recorded the sensation as if the trees themselves had reached for him, their roots curling beneath the soil, their branches stretching low to touch his shoulders. Every step forward felt heavier, the path beneath him unsteady, almost breathing with life. He glanced back at the campsite, only to find it obscured by a wall of pines that had not been there before. It was as if the forest had swallowed it whole, leaving him alone with the eyes, the whispers, and the trail that refused to end. The footprints began to multiply around him now, the small bare feet weaving a chaotic pattern on the forest floor, overlapping with clawed marks that dug deeper than any natural force could. They led not just forward but also in circles, forming rings of warning, or perhaps traps. Above, the eyes in the branches tilted downward. A rustle, subtle but deliberate, ran through the treetops, and then a whisper directly into his ear, warm and cold at once. "Look closer." He lifted his torch, scanning the tree line. For the first time, he saw faces among the shadows. Pale, twisted, watching silently, pressed against bark, as if the forest itself had hidden spectators, peering from the wood for centuries. Their lips moved, syncing with the whispers, their eyes reflecting an intelligence both ancient and cruel. The hiker swallowed hard, his journal later describing the sensation as if the forest was assessing him, deciding whether he was prey, trespasser, or curiosity. And then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Among the twisted faces in the trees, one pair of eyes, larger, darker, glinting with a familiar intelligence, followed his every movement with intent. Not a stranger's eyes, not a wild creature, but eyes that knew him. The forest had found him. The path twisted downward, leading him to a clearing where a river should have sung with life. Instead, there was only silence. The water, dark and still, stretched like black glass beneath the twisted pines, reflecting nothing but shadows. No ripple, no rush, not even the faint hiss of movement. The air grew damp, sticky, carrying a faint metallic tang that made his stomach churn. The footprints led him straight to the riverbank. Small bare feet pressed into the soil and along the stones, overlapping with clawed gouges that disappeared into the water, yet left no disturbance. The river swallowed their end as though it had never existed, leaving him staring at a surface too perfect to be natural. He knelt, dipping a finger into the water. It was cold, unnaturally so, and still. It did not ripple. When he tried to throw a pebble, the stone vanished beneath the surface, silent and invisible, as if the water itself refused to obey the laws of the world. The whispers rose from the forest again, closer now, urgent. He could feel them in the air, pressing against his skin, circling his head like a predator's attention. The eyes in the tree line followed him, but the river drew his gaze. There, in the impossibly black water, something moved. Not a fish, not a reflection. Something beneath the surface shifted, long, thin, a shape that undulated beneath the glassy river like a shadow pressing upward from another world. His breath caught. It was impossible to discern size or form, yet he knew instinctively it was aware of him, watching him and waiting. The journal later described the sensation as if the water itself was sentient, holding its breath, calculating his next step. He could hear nothing from it, yet its presence was loud in his bones, a weight pressing downward, an insistence to step closer. He tried to step back, but the riverbank had changed. The trees behind him seemed denser, closer, the shadows pressing in so tight he felt trapped. His pulse raced, every instinct screaming to turn. Yet the trail of footprints extended toward the water, small bare feet dancing silently along the shore, clawed prints interlaced with them, leading him forward. A rustle from the tree-line made him jump, torch swinging wildly. The eyes watched still, some higher, some lower, but all fixed. The whispers wrapped around him in a tightening coil. Step closer. See what waits. Hear what cannot speak. He stumbled to the river's edge, the black water stretching endlessly before him, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. And then, as the whispers intensified, a single motion broke the glassy surface. A hand, or something like it, reached up from beneath. Thin, elongated, impossibly pale, its fingers curling like claws. The water did not ripple, simply held the hand there, suspended, waiting. The hiker's torch wavered, casting light over the bank. He realized then the horrifying truth. The water carried no sound because it had already consumed everything that had passed through it. The forest's life, the animals, the birds, and perhaps the men who had walked this trail before him. And now it wanted him. He retreated a step, tripping over a root, his torch beam catching the rippling shadows along the trees. The eyes blinked, the whispers rose, and the trail of footprints extended into the water, daring him to follow. The journal's final entry on that page was brief, trembling. It waits for me beneath the glass. Cannot turn back. The forest won't allow it. And as he froze, the black water shifted once more deliberate this time, like something breathing slowly beneath its surface, preparing to claim what had wandered too far. The forest grew darker still as he followed the silent river, its black waters stretching endlessly on one side while the trees pressed ever closer on the other. Every step felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted his movement. The whispers from the trees had not ceased. They wound through the branches and pressed against his mind, insistent, patient, a chorus that demanded obedience. He stumbled onto a small rise, the torch beam catching something half-buried in the leaf litter. Kneeling, he brushed away the damp leaves and discovered a leather-bound journal, the cover worn but intact. Its pages smelled of mildew and soil, yet the words within were preserved, written in a shaky, hurried script. The entries told of a hiker, another who had walked this path years before. He had spoken of the same trail, the same whispering pines, and the same eyes watching from the tree line. But the final entries chilled him beyond measure. I buried the journal to warn others. They will follow the trail no matter what. The forest takes those who wander too far. If you read this, do not step closer. Do not let it see you. It knows your name. The hiker's fingers trembled as he turned the pages. Symbols were etched between the words, spirals, jagged lines, shapes resembling hands reaching upward. The more he read, the heavier the forest felt, the shadows pressing closer, the silence turning into a suffocating blanket. The footprints began again, circling him now, appearing out of nowhere in the dirt and leaves. The small bare feet danced, clawed prints interlaced, forming a ring around the buried journal. He tried to stand, to retreat, but his legs felt rooted, unwilling to obey. The whispers rose once more, voices overlapping, chanting words he could not understand but which his mind translated into a single thought. You belong here. You are ours. The river's surface shimmered, black and unbroken. Yet in its depths he thought he glimpsed movement, shapes coiling, stretching, waiting. The forest itself seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling in time with his own panicked heartbeat. Then he noticed it, the eyes, hundreds, perhaps thousands, glowing faintly among the pines. Some were at eye level, others far above, but all fixed on him, unblinking, patient, and undeniably aware. The whispers escalated into a crescendo, a storm of sound threading through the branches and undergrowth, curling around his ears and burrowing into his skull. He tried to grab the journal, to carry it with him, but the earth shifted beneath his hands. The leaves, soil, and roots seemed to tighten around the book, resisting, as though the forest itself refused to allow him to remove it. A rustling behind him drew his eyes. Shadowed forms slipped between the trees, moving with impossible speed and silence. Limbs bent unnaturally, heads tilted at impossible angles, faces pressed against bark, pale and unhuman. They watched, waiting. The whispers sharpened, coalescing into one command that chilled him to the core. Bury it, or join it. The hiker dropped to his knees, shoveling dirt over the journal as fast as he could, heart hammering, lungs burning. Each handful of soil felt heavier than the last, as though he were burying not just a book but a part of himself. When the journal was finally covered, the whispers fell silent for a heartbeat. The shadows in the trees shifted, and the river remained impossibly still. He rose, trembling, feeling as though the forest had scrutinized his every movement. But the footprints did not end. They continued forward, deeper into the unending pines, guiding him toward a place he did not want to see, toward a presence he could already feel waiting. The journal was buried, the warning left behind, but the forest would not release him. The path narrowed, twisting in ways that made no sense. Trees bent unnaturally, branches intertwining above to form a tunnel of shadow that swallowed every trace of sky. The whispers returned, low and insistent, threading through the forest like living vines, curling around his mind, pressing him forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself was weighing him down, drawing him deeper into its endless heart. The footprints he followed grew more erratic, small bare feet interlaced with clawed marks, moving in circles, zigzags, and patterns he could not comprehend. They led him through thick underbrush, over roots that seemed to twist like serpents beneath his boots, through patches of mud that swallowed his feet and tugged at him as though trying to claim him. He stumbled over a fallen log, nearly losing the torch. Its beam wavered, catching shapes in the shadows. Twisted forms, pale and impossible, pressed between the trees. Heads tilted at impossible angles. Eyes reflecting light that should not have existed. Faces pressed into bark, peering out at him with silent intent. He blinked, and the forms were gone. But the feeling remained, a pressure at his back that he could not shake. The air grew colder, biting into his skin, crawling beneath his clothes. His breath formed clouds in front of his face, even though there was no frost. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. No clearing, no sign of human life, no sky above, only the tunnel of pines and shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The whispers intensified, overlapping, chanting, urging him forward. He felt eyes on him from every angle. The tree line seemed to ripple, shifting, folding, and bending as though the forest itself was aware of his presence. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to run, to flee to the river, to the campsite. But the footprints ahead refused to end. The ground beneath him seemed to shift. Roots coiled and uncoiled, forming patterns that were almost words. He fell to his knees, trembling, pressing his hands to the soil. The earth pulsed beneath his fingers. The whispers coalesced into a single command: "Do not stop." Ahead, the trail twisted into darkness so thick it seemed to absorb the torchlight entirely. The river's silent blackness could no longer be seen, the clearing of the campsite erased from memory. Only the trail remained, a thread winding through a forest that refused to end. Shadows moved in the corner of his eyes, shifting, stretching, impossible limbs bending, faces peering from twisted bark. He dared not look directly, fearing they would find him if he did. And yet, every instinct compelled him to follow. The journal buried beneath the soil offered no comfort now. Its warning had been ignored, or perhaps it had been intended only as a lure. The forest had decided. It would not let him leave. It had waited for him, and now it had him entirely. A rustling from high above drew his eyes. Branches bent downward as though reaching, stretching long shadows toward him. And from the darkness, a whisper that cut through the chorus, sharp and deliberate. "You belong to the trail now." Every step forward felt like sinking into the earth itself, yet he obeyed. The forest had swallowed the world behind him, erased it entirely. The path before him twisted endlessly, and the eyes, the watching, unblinking eyes, followed every move he made. There was no end. There would be no end. Only the forest, only the whispers, only the trail that refused to release him. The forest closed in, branches curling like fingers around the narrow path. The hiker's lungs burned with every step, and sweat dripped into his eyes despite the biting chill. The whispering had grown louder, a symphony of voices threading through the trees, each one repeating his name, urging him forward, suffocating him with insistence. The footprints led him to a small clearing, one that should have been a respite, but the silence that met him was heavy, unnatural. A fallen tree lay across the clearing, its bark split and jagged. And there, pressed into the soft earth, were marks that made his blood run cold. Handprints. Not small, not human, clawed, elongated, etched into the soil as though a desperate being had struggled, leaving behind the last trace of its life. They formed a circle, broken and smeared, like someone had fought and failed. Among them were small bare feet, the same type that had haunted the trail, pressing closer together, converging toward a single point. The hiker's torch flickered, and in its wavering light, he saw it. Farther ahead, at the edge of the clearing, a shadowy figure crouched, twisted unnaturally. He could not make out features, but the outline suggested struggle, agony, and something entirely wrong. A silent scream seemed to echo through the forest, filling his chest with a chill so deep it stole his breath. He stumbled forward, his boots sinking into the soil. The whispering erupted into a roar, voices overlapping in fractured cries. "Help! Help! Don't let it take me! Follow the trail!" The hiker froze. The voice was familiar. It was the man who had disappeared before him. The footprints that led nowhere were no longer silent. They were echoes of the man's terror, etched into the earth, guiding the hiker toward the truth he dreaded. The clawed marks intertwined with the small bare prints, forming patterns that twisted and shifted as he stepped closer, like a map drawn by something alive. The shadowy figure did not move as he approached. It remained crouched, quivering, a frozen testament to fear. And then the whispers sharpened, coalescing into one final cry. Run. Don't stop. Don't look back. He obeyed instinctively, sprinting down the narrow path, tripping over roots and stones, his torch beam swinging wildly, catching glimpses of eyes, faces, and twisted forms pressed into the undergrowth. The forest seemed to pulse with life, each step forward sinking deeper into the earth, each breath stolen by the weight of the shadows pressing from every side. Branches clawed at him, tearing at his clothes, pulling him back, but the footprints continued, urging him forward. The man's final cry echoed in his ears, a sound of terror and pleading, a warning from someone already consumed by the trail. And then he realized the trail itself had changed. The path he had followed for hours had looped, twisted, and now it led him not to the river, not to the campsite, but toward a dark mass in the trees. A gathering of shadows that pulsed with intent, a presence ancient and patient, waiting to claim him as it had claimed the others. His journal later described it in fragmented sentences. I cannot escape. The forest watches. The trail moves. The eyes are everywhere. I am not alone. I hear him. I see them. It waits. A final gust of cold wind swept through the clearing, and the whispers fell silent for a heartbeat, leaving only one sound, the slow, deliberate exhale of the forest itself, as if it were drawing him into its heart. The last cry for help faded into the trees, swallowed by shadow and earth, leaving him alone with the trail, the footprints, and the watching eyes. The forest stretched endlessly, every tree a sentinel, every shadow a whisper of movement. The hiker's legs burned with exhaustion. His lungs gasped for air thick with damp and metallic tang. The trail beneath him pulsed faintly, almost alive, a thread weaving him forward into the unseen heart of the woods. He reached a final clearing, one that seemed impossibly vast, yet claustrophobic all at once. The trees arched overhead, forming a tunnel that dissolved into darkness at the far end. The footprints led directly into that darkness. Small bare feet, intertwined with clawed marks, disappearing as though swallowed by the void itself. A hush fell over the forest. The whispers, the eyes, the rustling of the branches, all fell silent. For the first time, he felt the oppressive presence of the woods as something absolute, inevitable. The trail had brought him here for a purpose he could not comprehend, yet his instincts screamed that resistance was futile. He stepped forward. The darkness welcomed him like an open mouth. Every sound of the forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of distant branches, was swallowed instantly. The air itself thickened, pressing against his chest, bending around him as though guiding him deeper. He could no longer see the river, the campsite, or any part of the world he had known. Only the trail remained, endless and unyielding. A movement flickered in the corner of his vision. Faces, pressed against the bark, twisted and pale, eyes glowing faintly, vanished as quickly as they appeared. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, stretching upward and outward, waiting, patient, deliberate. He realized too late that he was no longer walking through a forest. He was walking through the consciousness of it. Every tree, every root, every shadow was alive, aware, watching, and he had been drawn into its center. He heard a whisper behind him, soft but insistent, "Join us." No footsteps followed him, yet the small bare footprints pressed alongside his own, guiding him into the darkness. The clawed marks deepened in the soil, forming patterns that writhed and shifted, a language older than memory, older than the forest itself. He tried to call out, tried to scream, but his voice dissolved into the air. The ground beneath his feet pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing him forward with a force he could not resist. The journal he had buried, The cries of the man who had vanished before him, all the warnings he had ignored, they were nothing. The forest had always waited for him. Then he saw it, a black mass, vast and formless, hovering at the end of the trail, eyes opening in its depths, countless and unblinking. It exhaled, a gust of air that stole the warmth from his body, and the whispers merged into one, long, infinite, inevitable command. Step into nothing, and he did. The darkness swallowed him whole. His torch flickered and went out. The footprints he left behind faded into the soil. The forest sighed, satisfied, and the whispers scattered into silence, leaving only the pulse of the trail, patient and eternal. No one ever found him. The river remained black, the campsite untouched, the trail as it had always been, inviting, impossible, endless. The forest waited for the next hiker, the next curious soul who would follow the footprints into nothing, just as he had.